Well, yesterday we left off with James's really exhortation to be people who are people of our word. There's something that characterizes us in the eyes of God and other people is the fact that we're truthful people, that we have become people of great faith because we have taken the treasure of faith that God has given us and we've fully surrendered it to Him. We've invested completely into Him, or at least are endeavoring to do that on an ongoing basis. And as we do that, we've tried to live very transparently and honestly before God, and as a consequence before other people. Because the whole point is that people can't trust what you say. They won't trust you at all, and they will live in a guarded and protected relationship. There are many people who feel really kind of relationally isolated, and they don't understand it's because they're not truthful people, that others can't rely on what they say as being actually true, but rather it's couched with all sorts of falsehoods and misrepresentations and deceptions. When people are like that, the real underlying issue is that they can't face the truth about themselves. Well, that leads to all sorts of difficulties, is why James goes on to say in the next verse, in verse 13, he says, "Is any one of you in trouble?" That's the NIV. The New American Standard translates, "Is any among you suffering?" In fact, the Amplified translation does what the Amplified does. It amplifies the meaning, and it adds to it, "Is anyone afflicted, ill-treated, or suffering evil?" And this is an interesting concept because suffering is always associated with pain. In fact, we often talk about suffering and pain as being synonymous, basically the same thing. But we can have great pain in our life and not suffer, because pain may be the physical, mental, emotional side of an experience in our life, but suffering is really dealing with how we allow those things to affect us. We all go through physical pain. It's part of life. We'll go through physical hardships, relational hardships. There'll be distressing things and disappointing things in our life. But if we start suffering from those things, it's because we've let them become the definition, really the reference point for the rest of our lives, that we begin to view every future experience through that past experience, which was so negative. And so I find it in people who saying, well, I can never trust people because this person betrayed me or was dishonest, which is an unfortunate conclusion, because if you don't trust people, you're going to be isolated from them, and you're soon going to be feeling a lot of suffering, the worst kind of suffering, I think, that of isolation and loneliness. Proverbs, Solomon said, if a man wants to have friends, he has to show himself friendly. Well, what does it mean to be friendly? It doesn't mean just to say, hi, how are you, and have a smile. That's fine as well as it goes. But the reality is, to be friendly means that you relate to that person in a gracious, caring, and loving manner, that you value them and you're willing to invest in them because you see great value in that investment. And that's the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we pulling back from people because of some past hardship or difficulty? I hear people say things like this all the time, and it so saddens me. They say, well, I'll never do that again. Well, you have to step back and say never is a big word, has an terrifying finality to it. But the simple fact is you're beginning to look at every other experience that you go through in your life through the lens of that one lone bad experience. And that usually can sabotage you because, well, let me be honest. Every time I've said never to God, He comes back and says, next. I find that's the next thing. He actually brings me right back to that same thing and makes me go through it again until I overcome by the grace of God and the power of His Holy Spirit. So if somebody has treated me poorly, at least in my estimation, and I say, well, I'm not going to allow that kind of person into my life again, it's really amazing that God will just bring me around and put me back in that same dynamic, not because He wants me to be hurt by those people again, but because He wants me to be able to forgive the people who hurt me in the first place, and to say, I forgive you. I mean, it's safe to say to a person like that, I forgive you, but I will never really kind of entrust myself to you until you've shown that you're trustworthy. But I hold no malice. I hold no hatred. I hold no anger towards you. I forgive you. You just have to work to earn my trust again before I invest in you in the same way. And I think that's reasonable. But He says of that person, when you're in trouble, He says he should pray or she should pray Why does he add that caveat? You should pray. Because what he says is when you go through troublous times in your life, you need to bring them into the presence of God and prayerfully work through them so that you can respond in a way that honors God. I remember years ago going through a very painful relational dynamic with somebody that I trusted, and they again proved to be untrustworthy. And I would find myself, it was interesting, a lot of things happen to me when I'm cutting the grass. As I'm cutting the grass, I started thinking about this person, and I felt all this ugliness coming up in my heart towards them. And immediately I recognized that Jesus said, forgive your enemies, pray for those who despitefully use you, love your enemies, and so forth and so on. If you don't forgive, you will not be forgiven. And I found myself just stopping and saying, Father, forgive me for giving place to the devil. Forgive me for holding that resentment in my heart. I pray, God, that you would bless them. You would just pour your blessings upon them so richly that they will look at themselves and say, why was I so unkind or so unfair to that person? Because I found this in my life. When I have been blessed by God, I love the world and I love everybody in it. And it's when I feel like I've been treated poorly or unfairly that I become really squinty-eyed and distrustful and really kind of a miserable person. You don't want to live your life as a miserable person. What you want to do is just simply say, God, teach me how to love by dealing with people who are unlovely. And when you do that, you're allowing God to help you. That's why he said, if you're going through some hardship, the first thing you need to do is pray. Not to sit down and figure out a formula for solving your problems. You need to begin by saying, God, I pray that you lead, direct, and guide us through this circumstance so that we would know how that we are supposed to act and respond and behave in the face of this difficulty. And that's why, again, it's always about letting God be the first reference point in our life and not letting past experience or even our own thoughts and intellect and abilities be the reference point, but rather letting God be the point of reference. Challenging stuff, I know it's for you, and I don't say it simply or because I think it's easy. I know it's really hard. But I also know that part of the disciplines of the Christian life are to really allow God to have control of every new area that he exposes you to in your walk with him. And whatever that is in your life, I'm praying right now that Jesus will pour out his blessing and his grace, and you'll have the courage to simply let go of your planning and let go of your resentments and let go of everything else that you're hanging on to right now, and just simply go aside and pray and say, God, I pray that you just guide and direct me and give me insight into what your will is. And I guarantee you he will do it. And you'll be thankful. Many blessings, my friends.